Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well. You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. It's Monday, baby. It's Monday. Early. What is this week going to bring? Who knows? This is video one of God knows how many. I'll do as many videos as it needs to be done. As things come out, we will report on them. And look, there is an article that I wanted to share with you, and it is referencing the Idaho 4 case. Call it a miscarriage of justice. Now, some people will agree with that, but there's two sides to that story. I'm going to share my thoughts on how this is a miscarriage of justice. But first of all, let's talk about how the Washington Times are reporting it as a miscarriage of justice. So check this out. So this is letter to the editor, Kohberger plea deal, a miscarriage of justice. I know there's a few people that, yeah, it definitely is. This week, the nation was stunned to learn that prosecutors in Idaho have agreed to accept accused killer Bryan Kohberger's plea deal. Bryan Kohberger admits to killing 4 Idaho students, but motive remains unclear. And stick a pin in that, because this is something that we're going to touch on in a second. On Wednesday, Mr. Kohberger, who was previously charged with brutally murdering 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 in Moscow, Idaho, pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without parole. Much of the US, as well as several of the victims' families, are outraged that Mr. Kohberger will not face the death penalty. It's incredibly ironic that this case is coming to a head at a time when we are seeing another high-profile case hinging on a life without parole sentence from California, the Eric and Cole Menendez case. If ever there were an example of when life without parole does not guarantee that the accused will never get out, it is the Menendez case. Now, look, some people argue that the Menendez brothers should have got out a long time ago. But look, that'll be for another day. After serving more than 30 years in prison, the brothers appear likely to be freed soon. And this says, there is always a segment of the public that cries foul and demand the convicted to be freed. But there's always a reason, isn't there? It ain't just as simple as, oh, we just want to get convicted killers out on the street. There's always more to it. There's always a bigger picture, and some people want to kind of compartmentalize what's happening here, which is either the execution of an individual or just removing their rights to have freedom. So they'll look at a situation and they will try and ignore mitigating factors, or they will consider, like in the Bryan Kohberger case, that there's still a lot of things that don't quite sit right. And just stick a pin in that for a second. It says, as well as in the Menendez case, the punishment experienced by the accused depends on politics and the political climate at the moment. This is not justice. What is plaguing our judicial system? Is it incompetence, laziness, corruption, or just gutter politics? Let us never forget that while the feelings and desires of the families of the 4 murdered Idaho students should be foremost, Mr. Kohberger's crimes are in fact crimes against all the people of Idaho and all the citizens of the United States. The prosecutors and judges who made the decision to accept the deal have violated the trust bestowed in them and let us all down. So what do they basically mean here? Do you know what I mean? And let's just read this, like the old paratroop. He says, my conclusion is that there must have been a fatal weakness in the prosecution's case that they feared would result in an acquittal for them to accept the plea bargain. The public doesn't know what weakness and may never find out. And it's this fatal weakness. I said this, and it is a case of, look, and we can go round and round and round and round in circles if you like, but it got to a point where the towel was thrown in. Now, for those critical thinkers like myself, we looked at the Idaho 4 case, we looked at the evidence that was public against Bryan Kohberger, and it was very, very clear that there was a lot of questions around this evidence. A car that might have been Bryan Kohberger's, but it might not have been. It was not definitive. Phone data that was questionable at best. He was never placed at the property. These 23 times, the best that they could do would say that Bryan Kohberger was connected to a tower that would provide service up to within 100 metres of 1122 King Road. At no point was he placed physically at the property through data such as phone data. But they did have phone data, and there was phone data that they did hide, that they did retain, that they did claim didn't exist and that couldn't be got, and that was false. And look, maybe in the future we'll hear from the likes of Ray. I know that there's some rumblings that he's potentially doing an interview with Lana over on Truth of Transparency when this whole situation kind of blows over and the plea deal is complete and, Bryan Kohberger is sentenced. So look, maybe there is more stuff that will come out and there will be more clarity. There definitely does need to be more clarity. But even up in the plea hearing itself, the change of plea, what did we hear? We heard Santa, angry Santa, bad Santa, he still had to guess. He was still quoting the PCA, even as far as where is the knife from this crime, and it was still speculation. It was still speculatory. We think that Bryan Kohberger might have done this. Well, Bryan Kohberger's seemingly thrown the towel in. He's seemingly thrown the towel in and said, yeah, I did it. I accept it. So what, has nobody gone to him and said, all right then, Bryan, so where is the knife then, mate? What did you do with the knife? Well, I did this with it. And then do you see what I mean? Why is just such a simple thing, just such a simple question and something that would alleviate a lot of doubts not been covered? Do you know what I mean? And I know it's not a legal thing. It's not something that has to be done. It's not something, but even Steve Gonsalves would turn around and say, I'd want him to give details that only the killer would know. Something where even the people who do doubt whether Bryan Kohberger is guilty would be able to be like, okay, he definitely did it, because how would he have done it if he, or how would he have not have done it and known what he's known? Do you know what I mean? But we can't even get that. We literally don't even have that, and I don't understand it. If Bryan Kohberger behind closed doors is genuinely, yeah, I did it, I give up, yes, I'm a guilty man, then has nobody thought to say, okay, then, Bryan, well, what did you do, mate? You could indeed ask him why he did it and try and get an insight into it. Now, I know that Bryan Kohberger will get an opportunity to speak at sentencing, and maybe he will speak at sentencing. Maybe he will speak in the interim to the people in power, and it will become clear some of these questions that we do still have. But there was, like this guy here says, there was a fatal flaw in the prosecution's case. That is the only thing that makes sense. The fatal flaw in their case that could have seen Bryan Kohberger walk, and they didn't want to roll the dice. So what was the fatal flaw? And when you think about it, and you think about the things that are still missing from Bryan Kohberger just saying, yeah, I'm guilty, there is also a fatal flaw in the defense as well. And that is that the be-all and end-all is if public perception of Bryan Kohberger is enough to weasel its way into the courtroom, then ultimately he could get found guilty, and that would be execution. And as I said in an earlier video, the thought of death can be a huge motivator when it comes to saying that you did a crime. And look, some people just don't want to die, and some people may have trust that there is enough people out there that would continue to look into things, because there are a lot of people who are still continuing to look into things. And maybe some things, someone's somewhere, sometime will slip up and the truth will come to the light. But who knows? Maybe Bryan Kohberger did just do it, and we're all just trying to get our heads around something that seemingly happened so strangely and so quickly, to the point where we're still standing here with our heads spinning. But let me know what you think. What was the fatal flaw? Was the fatal flaw that simply the prosecution's case was nothing but garbage? Was it about they didn't want things to come to light that didn't need to come to light? Who knows? Love you all. Mwah.